Okay, everyone, I think we have a lot of attendees, and for those who are joining us late, they're going to have to catch up. So I'll begin and just say hello to everyone. My name is Shannon Brett, and I'm the Curatorial Officer here at the Griffith University Art Museum. I'm very happy to be bringing you today's fabulous panel of speakers in yet another of our series of panel discussions for Rebecca Belmore's captivating exhibition, Turbulent Water, now open here at the Art Museum, Queensland College of Art, South Bank in Brisbane, through to the 19th of June this year. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which I speak today in Meanjin, Brisbane, which is close by to my traditional homelands of the Waka Waka, Gurang Gurang and Butchulla peoples. I would also like to acknowledge all First Nations people watching and joining us today. So now I am presenting 4 of the greatest people working in the arts today, whose work, experiences and careers I am in awe of. I present Wanda Nanibush, Brenda L Croft, Megan Tamati-Quennell and Saunders. I think before I get into things, I just a little bit of housekeeping for you all. We recommend the gallery view for this discussion because there are a lot of us. And we may have 1 or 2 of our speakers who perhaps have to leave early. And if that happens, don't be surprised because this is the life of busy people. So I'd like to begin the discussion by presenting you with a few personal thoughts and observations about First Nations advocacy and the way that I admire the people who live it. So I want to acknowledge that in terms of First Nations artists and arts workers, we're all connected in one way or another. We're aware of each other's practices, careers, achievements, and respectfully our responsibilities to our own communities and to each other. And First Nations people come together to do this work. Like you were just saying, Megan, you're happy that the artist is there and you know that's what you want. And the work is never ever restricted to a 9 to 5 time slot. This work is the kind of work that can become a lifelong dedication, and it's 24/7. It can be a passion, an addiction, or even an obsession. And I just want to see more and more First Nations people of all ages dive into this exciting arena and to contribute their voices as something solid that supports the legacy that is our culture and our cultures. So I'm delighted to jump into today's discussion so that we may hear from these people of many talents so that you, our audience, may have a better understanding of what First Nations advocacy and agency is. Now let's whiz around the Zoom space here and begin with some introductions, okay? So can you all speakers as guests tell us your name, where you are from, and how you describe your role. If we can begin with you, Wanda. Wanda Nanibush? Or perhaps
Wanda might have frozen, it looks like.
Yeah, it's frozen, yeah. And there's the also to our viewers, so Wanda's dropped out. You'll know that, just know that we are coming to you from 3 separate countries. So if there is a dropout, a screen freeze, just understand that that's what's happening here. So if we can begin with you, Megan.
Okay. Okay. Kia ora koutou, mihi atu kia koutou. Ko taranaki te maunga, ko waitara te awa, ko muru raupatu, rawa ko o tātou oku iwi, ko Tiatiawa, that should have been Oku Mawai, sorry. Tiatiawa Rawa ko Ngaitahu Okui. My name is Megan Tamati-Quennell. I'm a curator in 2 places at the moment, 2 half-time jobs, and people are just emailing me and I just want them to stop. It's like, stop. Yeah, so I'm working both. I've been a curator for 31 years. I've had a long association with my friend Brenda Croft here. I met Ree a long time ago, and I think really through Bumali. Wanda, I've also worked with. I work as the Curator of Modern and Contemporary Māori and Indigenous Art at Te Papa in Wellington, and I've recently taken up a position, I've dropped my hours to half-time there in a half-time position at the Government Brewster Art Gallery as Indigenous Curator Contemporary Art, which is much kind of a broader kind of title, and it's one of my home communities, which is really the reason I ended up coming here. I said no a couple of times to the position, and one of my cousins said, Megan, we're going to ask you, I'm only going to ask you to be in this space once. So I was like, okay, I'm there. So I'm here to kind of activate and kind of shift some things really for my family. So it's really I've never lived here. My mother was brought up here, but I and my great grandmother, I stay at her house. I mean, she's passed away now, but I stay at her house in Waitara and come over to New Plymouth. But it's been extraordinary to be here. And as I said, I've always come here, but I wasn't brought up here. I was brought up in the South Island, which is my other side. Anyway, that's enough from me.
Okay. Wanda, can you hear us?
Yeah, sorry, my internet is unstable, so it keeps kicking me right off Zoom. I don't know. I've moved to another room, so maybe that will help.
Okay, fingers crossed. And we understand. I was just saying that, you know, we're in 3 separate countries here for the Zoom call, so we'll just kind of see how we go in terms of internet. Yeah. Wanda, perhaps if you could introduce yourself, who you are in terms of also the exhibition here at the Griffith University Art Museum, and if you can describe your role as well, please.
Hello, Haneen, everyone. I'm Wanda Nanibush, Anishinaabe from Beausoleil First Nation, a little island in Georgian Bay in Canada, the country now called Canada. And I am a curator of Indigenous art at the Art Gallery of Ontario, which is one of the largest museums here. And I am the co-curator of the Rebecca Belmore Turbulent Water exhibition. So if you haven't seen it at Griffith, please get your ass over there and make sure you don't miss one of the most fabulous artists. And yeah, I'm in love with all the people in this Zoom call. And I have had the privilege of working with some of you, and will have the privilege of working with more of you in the future. Yeah, that's enough about me.
Ree.
Never enough.
Hi, everybody. Oh, God. I'm actually based, I'm an artist who works in the interdisciplinary practice of new technologies. I'm a lecturer at the University of Queensland in Indigenous Studies. My people are the Gamilaroi, Walwyn, and Biripi people from New South Wales and the kind of coastal area, northern coastal area, and I'm currently located at the moment on the Jagera Turrbal country here in Brisbane.
Thanks, Ree. And Brenda?
Hi, everybody. It's going to be a love fest, isn't it?
Yes.
I will start by saying I pay my respects to the traditional custodians on whose land I'm privileged to live and work, the Nyambri, Ngunnawal, peoples here in the place known as Canberra. And I do that as a Gurindji Mulyan Wukpura woman on my father's side of the family. And I work at the Australian National University, where I work across the space of the School of Art and Design and the Centre for Art History and Art Theory. I have a great love for this region, and I feel very, I mean it when I say I feel very privileged to be able to live and work here. And I've got connections to this place through my dad when he brought our family down here in 1975 when he was working at the Department of Aboriginal Affairs, and I've kept coming back to Canberra. My family's experience, my dad was a member of the Stolen Generations, and he was born circa 1925 on his traditional homelands, our homelands in the Northern Territory, at a place called Victoria River Downs, and under the policies of the day was taken away with my grandmother. And then removed from her care at about the age of 5, and didn't see her again until he was nearly 50. But in the 70s, through self-determination, First Nations peoples in Australia from all over the country came to Canberra with the establishment of the Department of Aboriginal Affairs. And there'd obviously been decades preceding that with activism by our warriors. Well, from the get-go, from the days of first contact, really. But Canberra's always been a really interesting, fascinating place for First Nations peoples who've come from everywhere. And I just took that for granted growing up as a kid. So I've been really lucky to be kind of steeped in that. And I say it that my dad gave me an invisible passport in that way that has allowed me to have connections to our mob right around the country. And that's how I followed through with my work. Megan is a dear, dear sister who I just adore and has been there at really dark times in my life, as well as really fabulous times. And Wanda is just an inspiration in terms of energy and light and hilarity that is always steeped in profundity. And Ree, I've known, God, since Eora Centre days, really, and then Boomali days, and our involvement through Boomali and working together on projects over the years, and Shannon, you know, knowing you as well. So I just jumped at the chance to be part of this. It's just a wonderful opportunity, because especially after being locked away over the last year, it's fantastic.
Yeah, just to have this opportunity to have this yarn together is a fantastic thing with everything that's going on, sadly, around the world. I'd like to just ask like a really quick little question before we get into some bigger things. I think I asked a couple of you when we first began this call, but I think Wanda hadn't joined us at that point. So, and Brenda, you gave me a little bit of an insight then, but has everyone here crossed paths at some point?
Yeah.
Yep, so good, okay. So let's talk about your current role. You've mentioned what role you're in right now, but can you tell us some history about that role in terms of your personal backstory? And if you could perhaps include some heroes or influences that were present upon your journey to where you are now. Wanda?
Yeah, I missed the instructions for the first question, so I was listening very closely at this one.
That's okay.
I was just trying to go on what other people were saying and try to catch up. So it's basically my current role. I think that in terms of the Curator of Indigenous Art, that's a brand new position, 3 years old. And it's a position that I fought for, position that I worked hard to make happen, lobbied for, created, and created in a new way. We had the choice of building a standalone department, which is how a lot of museums do it, where you have Indigenous art is separate from everybody else. But I thought it was strategic and smart to think about how we are on this land. So to create a new department and say it's Indigenous and Canadian. So Indigenous comes first, but we have this nation to nation relationship with Canada. And so it can never forget us. And we're the ground on which it stands. And also it allowed us to think about the art history by centering Indigenous within the Canadian conversation rather than us having our own spot. So I do both though, because I think it's really important that we have our own spaces and our own galleries as well. So we do both. And part of that is so that we can develop our own art histories and not have to continually speak about our work through the Canadian canon, through the Western art discourses, through all of that. So we need to kind of do both. So that's sort of my thinking there. It's also about power. And I think the fact that I share this department with a woman is not a mistake or like a happy coincidence. I don't think if she weren't a woman, she wouldn't have said yes to sharing power. So I think that there is also something about that model, I think that is very Indigenous, which is about sharing power. We don't really, and people only have power based on what they know. And people, they get power by people coming to them and asking them for things repeatedly. Like, oh, so-and-so is the person who knows how to do that. So we always go to so-and-so, and that's how that person ends up having an influence. And I think that's a much healthier way to view power than the kind of hierarchical BS that we deal with all the time. So yeah, that's a couple of things about that. Personally, I started curating in film and video first and new media. And somebody asked me to do a show in a gallery. And I was like, oh yeah, sure, why not? What's the difference? There's a big difference. So the first show I ever did was called Chronotopic Village. And I was still working with new media, film and video. So everything was a screen, right? Like everything was a projection, a screen or whatever, not thinking about, in a gallery like sound, how sound bleeds everywhere. And then thinking about how this was the first show they'd ever had where you couldn't turn on one light in the entire show. So the whole show was just lit by all the projections and stuff. But it ended up being really beautiful and very zen. So that's how I got into galleries. But my favorite place to be is like curating in public spaces and out in the street. And those are that's where I get truly excited. But I get excited in the galleries too. Don't get me wrong. Don't even know if I answered your question.
No, you have. That's fantastic. Yeah. And that's a great insight into where you kind of started, where it began. Did you have any influence along the way? Were there any Indigenous people that were working in the space that you wanted to be in? Because sometimes it's not always the case. You have to create these places yourself.
Yeah, that's the part of your question I'd forgotten, which is a really important one. I just finished writing about just all the Indigenous folks who have done so much within the museum world that allows my position to even exist, or the possibility of it to exist today. And so I guess the influences come in a number of ways. Personally, even how I came to art, right? Like, because it wasn't everywhere on the res. Like we didn't have museums, and I didn't grow up looking at art. I grew up looking at art like this, though, like this is the kind of thing we would have grown up with. And so, yeah, we had our artists around us, but not this other world of art that I've learned to love ever since. But there was a show curated by Robert Hoole, who is one of the first radical contemporary artists, to sort of challenge the modernists as masculinist and cold, and really bring in a kind of Indigenous iconography, thinking about abstraction as the oldest art in our countries and bringing that into art. And that was 1992. And that's what brought me to art. The first work I encountered in that show was Rebecca Belmore's Peace, and then James Luna and Faye Heavyshield, and, you know, just all these people that I've become friends with and have done shows with and curated. And now I'm doing Robert's major retrospective exhibition, which is kind of amazing to think I was this little kid, you know, from the res looking at all this art, and it was him. I didn't even know who he was at the time, but he radically shifted my life then. And now I get to gift him his retrospective. You know what I mean? And like, it's just like mind boggling. And I got to do Rebecca's retrospective, you know, last year. And I think, so they've been, all the artists that I've met and have been influences for me big time, not just because I love their art, but the art teaches me how to be in the world. Like what happens in the artwork, what I learn from it teaches me how to think, how to curate, how to be in the world, how to, you know, all kinds of stuff I learned from engaging artwork. So it's also, that is an influence.
Yeah.
And then curatorially, I mean, Megan has always been a powerhouse. Brenda's always been a powerhouse. So even before I met you guys, I knew your work. I knew who you were, dreamed of meeting you, dreamed of you loving me one day. And here we are. And Ria, oh my God, your work is incredible. And I haven't had the chance for you to fall in love with me yet, but I've fallen in love with you through your work. So
I love this. Brenda, you're right.
Give it some time. I wonder if you had 4 guys sitting here, whether they'd do this as well.
Brenda.
Oh yeah, they would. They love me too. Guys love me. No, I'm just kidding.
I meant 4 guys with each other rather than, of course they would love you. How could you not love you? But
well, actually, my brother,
Brenda,
growing up, I have 9 brothers. Well, 10. My brother Brian here as well. I have to add him in. He's 10. And I have 8 sisters. And actually, it's my brothers who I always found them to be incredibly loving. And Nishmen, like in our community, are actually very loving, very kind, very, you know, they have a macho side, but it only takes 2 seconds to knock that away. Like a kid walks in the room or, you know, like whatever. I think that, that kind of love is there in the men I grew up with. So, all right, well, you know, here we go.
Thank you, Wanda. And Brenda, we'll, if we can have you answering those questions next. So about yourself and yeah, just those influences.
Oh, well, I started as an artist, and it was just something that was always there for me as a kid. You know, any colouring in contest, I would enter it, mainly because I wanted to win a horse, which I never got to get. But I just was, I gravitated towards that. I didn't know what how you made a living out of that. I had no idea. I fell into art school. I fell into meeting, you know, wonderful people, but I'd have to go back before that in terms of people who influenced me. I mean, my dad, obviously, and my mother, but, you know, my dad just, I never felt there was anything I wasn't allowed to try to do. It's not that I couldn't do, I wasn't allowed to try and do things. And meeting the people, my dad was a cultural advisor with Department of Aboriginal Affairs, so he was often working with people from around the country. He worked really closely with David Gulpilil, one of our most revered cultural performers, actors. And so I just was so privileged to meet people coming through Canberra all the time, and just seeing different ways of cultural presence, and just by osmosis, I think, taking that on. I mean, I you know, like anybody, any young person, I was still kind of finding my way in the world. I felt like a complete imposter at art school. I wasn't cool enough. I didn't know, you know, all the art speak or things like that. And then I was lucky enough to meet Fiona Foley in my last year of high school. We both came to Sydney to go around to the art schools and universities. Through staying in touch with Fiona, I was introduced to people like Tracy Moffat, Michael Riley, Avril Quayle, Bronwyn Bancroft, Femi Bostock, the late Arone Raymond Meeks, a beautiful late brother, Michael Riley, Fernanda Martins, Jeffrey Samuels, and being invited to be part of Gormali Aboriginal Artists Cooperative in the late 80s was a gift. And it was through there that I met other people who are associated with that place, particularly my dear sister, Hetty Perkins, who I would have to say has been a major influence in my practice and my life, both on a professional and personal level. And our fathers were connected through being at the same children's home in the 1930s in the Northern Territory. So those kinds of connections, everything is interconnected, everything overlaps. And then meeting, I mean, there's a huge roll call of people. I think of people like Leanne Martin in Canada, Cheryl Larondel, who is a dear sister, Nancy Myflow in the US, and Nancy's known for her curatorial practice, but my young brother who passed away was working with her at the Native American Preparatory School in Santa Fe, and that's how I met Bitsy. My brother's death brought us together. Working with phenomenal people like Megan, who I just, you know, Lisa Rehana. I think of the late Jim Viviare. You know, there's such a roll call of people. Eddie Chambers, you know, talking about people of colour as well who've had a huge impact on my life. Adrian Piper, Destiny Deacon. How lucky am I, you know, to have had a chance to work not just as an artist, but as a curator. And it's been incredibly organic because there wasn't any rule book to follow. I mean, you know, I went and did a Master of Art Administration. It turned into that because I stayed there so long. It went from being a graduate diploma into an MA. But I had wonderful mentors and coaches, non-Indigenous people. Nick Waterlow, the late Nick Waterlow, was a really dear mentor. Joanna Mendelsohn. I think of Jim Logan, all the kinds of works we've had a chance to do across our countries, within our own countries, working with phenomenal people and having a chance at, you know, people believing in me, and I guess me believing in myself as well, to work at state and federal and international levels. And just, you know, I'm a Taurian, so I'm a bull, you know, I'm a bull at a gate, but I'm also sugar bag. So I'm the little honeybee, the little native honeybee that kind of buzzes around and like, you know, tries to work out how to bring people together. I hope that's what I do. And I want to, for me, it's always about making that space wider and more inclusive and bringing as many people along with you as you possibly can, because the more people are there, the more fun it is, you know. As I was saying before we went on air, you know, one of my memories of being in Venice with Megan and Rebecca, you know, what a taxi, coming back from, I don't know what it was, but I still treasured those. We won't say what happened. What happens on tour stays on tour. but, oh my God, fun! Just such great times. Paul Chatsmith, you know, watching you guys speaking recently is inspirational, and I encourage my students as much as possible to watch and learn. And for me, it's not about me talking about you; it's about hearing, you know, your voices. And on that note, I'll stop and hand over to you.
Thank you. That was,
well, now I'm
like,
jealous. I feel like I should have said a bunch
big
of
hug.
names.
Yes. Ree, can we hear your story? And I'm really like, I'm picking up all of these kind of, it's almost like cross-referencing as well, these journeys, isn't it? Because it is it's a smallish world that we live in terms of this work and those fantastic friendships that you build along the way. So what do you think, Ree?
Yeah, it's it's quite emotional listening to you guys kind of talk, really. I think for me, I was kind of, I mean, I've always been a creative kid, and my mum had this kind of vision that I was going to grow up to be an artist like Albert Namatjira, because he was the most visible Indigenous artist of the time. And so they were wanting you to kind of emulate that person. And of course, you know, my journey, of course, was, I guess, like a lot of Indigenous kids, of finding myself in that place of being a bit of a lost soul, trying to find my place in the world. And then I ended up at the Aboriginal Performing and Visual Arts School in the Eora Centre at in Redfern in Sydney, and that was started by Bobby Merritt, and it was a private Indigenous art school that was run with philanthropy money that he obviously sourced, it was, yeah, it was a kind of turning point. I just went there because I was kind of like, I can't keep doing these dead end jobs, and I hadn't really still quite figured out how I was going to be an artist. And I think that your parents are really into, you know, supporting you about that idea of being an artist when you're a kid. But by the time I turned 18, my mum kind of went, I think you need to go back to school because you need to get a job and you have to kind of do this art thing on the side. And I'm like, you know, and of course it just got completely pushed to the side. So I was 25 and felt very old by the time I got to university, and I was classed as a mature age student, and it completely changed my life. Of course, when I arrived, I was very arrogant about the idea that here's another idea that people are going to tell me that's going to work for me, because as a Black kid, I think you get sick of those kinds of opportunities, people telling you what you can become. But they forget to tell you what they allow you then to become after you become something. And so there are all these kinds of really, mixed emotions and feelings around it. And I remember Professor Michael McDaniels was my history teacher at the Eora Centre. And, he's now the PVC of Indigenous engagement at UTS. And he said to me something that nobody ever asked me before. He asked me, "What are you going to do when you finish here, Ree?" And I said, "I'm going to Tranby." And he goes, "Why the hell are you going to Tranby?" And I said, "Well, I can't go to university. I'm not smart enough." And he said, "Well, actually, that's not true." He said, "You're exempt from every class here, Ree. All you're doing is the creative classes." And so he made an appointment, and I ended up in art school, and I only applied to one because I kind of thought, if it's meant to be, it'll be. If it's not meant to be, I won't get in. And so, of course, the rest is history. I ended up getting in. I met really wonderful people along the way. And as Brenda mentioned, Nick Waterlow. I think Nick Waterlow was the person who introduced me to Brenda and Hetty, because I was in this exhibition. I was in my second year of my undergraduate, and I made this a really important work. It's a seminal work in my practice, called Look Who's Calling the Kettle Black. It was my first digital work.
Yeah.
And it's going to be 30 years since I made that work next year. And I've been thinking about that work a lot lately, and its relationship to why I made that work. And it was the time when we were having the Royal Commission into Black deaths in custody. And I was really concerned as an Indigenous woman, as a feminist, that there was no acknowledgement of the amount of Indigenous women that had died in their servant roles and in custody. And so I made the work, Look Who's Calling the Kettle Black, to represent that invisibility. And of course, it's gone on to appear and influence several of my works, in particular Poles Apart. Again, stemming from my grandmother's history. My maternal grandmother was part of the Stolen Generation. And when I finished, of course, that introduction through Nick to Brenda and Hetty, they suggested I come along and meet everybody up in Mali, and I joined the organization, the collective, and I met Brooke Andrews, of course, because he was just graduating from his undergraduate degree as well, and we both kind of joined together. And I was still also navigating the world as a queer artist, you know, and I just was very skeptical about where I went and how much I revealed about who I was. And that took a long time. And so it was great when I kind of met Brooke, because we were kind of, you know, queer guys hanging out together, kind of supporting each other. And he's way younger than I am, because, you know, that's just the way it is. He went through when he was younger. And I think the interesting thing now, you know, you don't think about your age. I think what happens is we get to a certain point in our lives, and you get to an age that feels comfortable, and I think you stay that age. And so for me, it's 37. So,
oh wow, that's great.
So I still feel that age,
Yep.
even though I'm about to turn 60 in about 6 months, which is huge, because I really didn't think I'd live past 21. And so through my engagement with, well, Brenda and Hetty have been enormous mentors and peers, you know, like have supported me. I was trained at Bamali as a curator and arts administration, and I also got my first job outside of Bamali through Hetty Perkins, who introduced me to Daphne Wallace, and I became the assistant curator of the Art Gallery of New South Wales. Development of their new collection before they opened that new gallery. Way back when.
Yeah.
But that was a really amazing time for that to happen, because what happened then for me is I spent this year being the assistant curator, and I realized that my heart was connected to my practice as an artist. I knew if I stayed any longer and made that full-time commitment to being a curator, that I would have never got to be able to realize the things that were meant to be realized for me as an artist. And I've gone on to do other curatorial works over the years. And yeah, one of my memorable kind of curatorial moments was when Brooke Andrews and I and the late Matthew Cook and his partner Tim approached Brenda and Hetty and asked them would they be interested in letting us have the first queer Indigenous Mardi Gras exhibition, which has gone on to have a long history. But we had this exhibition that was, and we called it Looking Good. And so that was kind of the beginning of that. And of course, Brooke and I had gone on to curate other shows together and separately. And it's always been there. It's kind of like it became part of my practice without it actually being a career that I pursued. So I was very grateful for those kind of experiences and journey and knowledge that because it's helped me as an artist to be able to think about my work and think and talk about my work and to develop my practice. And you know, so it's been great. But along the way as well, because I work in new technologies, you can't be too far away from the education system or the institutions that house the development of new technologies. So I always found myself reconnecting back constantly. And along the way, I've kind of ended up with a few degrees that I didn't necessarily plan to get, but they became part of that journey of the experimental practice. And then I ended up, because of my research, I'm an artist who researches history a lot like other Indigenous artists, but I made it a focused kind of area for my practice, which is extended to my family history. And I've gone on to develop an academic career within the university, working in Aboriginal education and being part of the development and delivery of that, those kinds of course material, and continue to develop my practice. I've never, ever step away from my practice, because my practice in itself is my living and breathing tool. Without it, I don't even think I'd be here. And so that's kind of what is my, you know, my legacy. It's part of the legacy that I want to leave. And I think for me, when I first went to art school, the artists that stood out for me at that time were Tracy Moffat and Gorda Bennett. Being a good Indigenous kid, I was looking for the Black artist, you know, and they were the artists that were there for me at that time. And I wouldn't have got through art school or got the education in terms of the critical thinking about the Black body if it wasn't for Sherry Moraga and Gloria Azalea's This Bridge Called My Back. It was my Bible. And of course I discovered their, you know, bell hooks. And then when I was about to finish my last year at uni, and Marcia Langton wrote, well, I heard it on the radio and I saw it on the television, and that was just still a seminal text today about new technology in this country, you know.
Yeah.
And then through Bamali, through the support, you know, like really, I wouldn't have an international profile if it wasn't for the work that that Brenda and Hetty and the community that was connected to Bamali. If they hadn't developed that international profile, I wouldn't have been able to have the experiences and grow like I did as an artist then. And so my first international residency was at Banff, and I met Cheryl Rondell and Ahasu Bikyao Iskwa. They were really important artists for me. And it kind of set that relationship that I continue to have engaging internationally with First Nations artists. So it's been a big journey, and even though I'm kind of approaching my beginning of my retirement period, I actually don't think I will ever retire from what I do as an artist. It's my lifeline.
Oh, and what a huge story in terms of you being this phenomenal artist, and you know, a completely senior artist in terms of not only this story that you've just shared with us, but what we in industry, how we view you as this legend. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
So Megan, I've kind of been a little bit strategic in this ordering of these questions.
Oh no. Oh no, don't do that.
Come on.
Okay.
So I'm looking at this page.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm adoring this text, and I was posted this beautiful publication when it was released.
I could have given you one.
Nikki Cumston posted mine to me. So yeah, Nikki and I have worked together in the past on a previous project, and I was just absolutely in awe of this beautiful publication, and just how beautifully it's staged, it's put together. Yeah. So perhaps if you could tell us about your career. Yes, Brenda. Yeah. And I guess leading up to this was last year. Yeah. Yeah. So,
but it was a show that was done much earlier, and as I said, for me, because it was a publication that looked at First Nations curatorial practice, or curatorial praxis, however you want to say it, I felt like it was really important to talk about the show that Brenda and I worked on together, and how you follow kind of a Māori ontology or an Indigenous ontology to kind of create something. Anyway, in terms of my background, I kind of fell into curating. My background was, I always thought I could write. I thought I was a writer. So I ended up being a journalist because I always thought I could write. And I got into journalism and I hated it. It was doom, gloom and politics and full of white men. And I found it quite disturbing, and I wasn't interested. The one thing that I did get to do within journalism was I got to do a column called In Town Tonight, which was for the Evening Post, which meant I got to preview all the art exhibitions and I was everyone's best friend because I got tickets to go to
Oh, yeah.
plays and music, and I got to preview everything. And not only did I get to preview those things, I ended up getting to preview Te Māori, which was a huge exhibition for us. But Te Māori Te Hokinga Mai, when that exhibition returned to New Zealand. And that exhibition was seminal in that it was the first exhibition of taonga Māori as an ancestral kind of, I suppose, objects that were taken out of the country, but in consultation with Māori people. So there were museum objects that were taken, and was taken to places like New York. And it was, I think there was a kind of a metaphor that Hirani Moko Mead talked about, and he said, you know, if the birds can't fly to the tree will move the tree. So if the birds don't fly, if we can't get the birds to fly to the tree, we'll take the tree to where the birds might be, kind of thing. So by taking, as he said, Māori art onto the world stage in New York and seeing it acknowledged as one of the great arts in the world, he felt like that would shift things here. And I think it was actually started by Americans, but he ran with it. Anyway, it completely changed museum practice in New Zealand. And I got to preview that show when it came back, which was such a privilege. Of course, they gave it to me as the most junior member of staff and the only Māori person, because they didn't think it was very important. When it came to the media proper preview, I got kicked out of the road. I didn't get to go at all. But I got to do the first part, and I remembered it was interesting. I remembered that I always loved art, but I think you forget those things. And especially, I was interested, Bree, when you were saying, you know, can you get a real job, you know, and not do that? They can just do that on the side. So I had forgotten that art was really important to me. And it had such an impact, but I also decided that I didn't want to work with taonga as in the more historical material. To me, that's like a whole lot of old people, you know, not that there's anything wrong with old people. I love old people. I just didn't want to be the experts of it. And I was really like, what is going on here? Because after Te Māori, people would go to the museum, Māori people all of a sudden took hold of the museum that was theirs. They would enter it, they would go there. They still didn't go to the art gallery. There was nothing there for them. And so I think I'm the second Māori art curator in the country. The first is a guy called Rangi Pānoho. He ended up becoming an academic. He's an amazing human being. I didn't have a lot to do with him because I think he thought I was about 12, and when I kind of I was 12 at the time, and you know, he thought I was very young and thought I was a bit silly probably. Anyway, but that was a long time ago. So he, in terms of influences for me, people like Lisa Reihana was a huge influence for me as an artist and as a human being. You know, I connected with her. I also became a weaver. I'm a traditional weaver. I learnt weaving from a woman called Diane Prince and another woman who was a relation of mine, Eranora Pukitapuhita. And I also wanted to be a filmmaker. So I met people like Barry Barclay who really changed the way that I thought about things. You know, I got this kind of political education with people like Merata Mita, people like Barry Barclay when I was about 19. And, you know, I was around these kind of incredible Iri Hapiti Ramsden, a whole lot of other people, Kerry Carr, Tunia Baker. They started up this organisation of all Māori people within communications, and because I was a journalist, I was pulled into that. So I thought I was going to be a filmmaker. I got into film, but then I didn't like the hierarchy of it because, again, I was down the bottom and, you know, I was the runner, I was the first assistant director or whatever it was, but I was, you know, at the bottom. And Larry Parr, another kind of Māori filmmaker in New Zealand, a producer, said, well, the problem with you, Megan, is that you want to be the director. And it was like, and your point is? And I actually ended up doing an internship at the National Art Gallery. And it was, they called for people to apply to the National Art Gallery to work. There were 5 kind of internships, 10-month internships. I applied. My background was film, was, you know, writing, weaving. Tim Walker, a Pākehā man, a gay Pākehā man, extremely amazing person. Out of like 500 people who applied for the position, I got it. And for me, it was really about, as I said, I felt like people would go to the museum downstairs, but they would never go to the art gallery. And where were those things, those stories about us like now? You know, people were interested in that historical culture, but who was sorting that out? And I felt like it was the right place for me to be. And in some ways, I just kind of went in there. I didn't really know what it was to be a curator, to be quite honest. I think I gave Tim a reasonably hard time. I went off and did another film when Te Rua, that Barry Barclay was shooting. And Tim said, but you're on an internship, you can't leave. But I said, but I am going, because I'm going to. Anyway, I did this internship, and he was probably my first teacher in terms of curatorial practice. But I felt once I was in there that I'd kind of found my calling. And it was actually everything that I ever wanted to do. And I have never left it since, which is weird. Well, I've left it a couple of times. One to work with my own tribe, and another time, but even then I was working in an arts capacity, and one time to have a baby. But most of the time, and I even worked after I had my baby, he was 4 months old, I was curating a show for my tribe, driving around the South Island with a baby beside me. So I suppose there are huge influences in my life, and I feel, and mentors and people who I feel extremely privileged. I have to say, people like Brenda and Hetty, for me, again, are people who have, you know, I go to Australia, I meet these people who I just found were extraordinary. It's like you find your own tribe internationally. People like Leanne Martin, people like Margaret Archuleta, who was at the Heard Museum in Phoenix, Arizona. You go halfway around the world and you meet a person who's similar to you. You know, Wanda Nanibush. Artists are always amazing. I learn so much from artists every day, still do. You know, I have close working relationships with all sorts of artists. Chronotopic Village, a very senior artist. Emily Karaka. You know, I knew Ralph Hortedy. I mean, I feel like I've had this huge amount of privilege in my life around all of that. And someone said to me once, and it's the same for me, they said it, and I've always said it, art kind of saved me. I don't know where I would be. I think I would be a complete mess if I hadn't worked in and around art. It's shaped me as a human, as a person, as a Māori woman. You know, all of that stuff is completely significant. I'm always amazed at, I suppose, how brave people are and the positions that they take, particularly artists. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Up now. Brenda, please talk.
I just wanted to say the reason there is a love fest here is because we have been through, it's not just all the fun of being together for exhibitions and openings, and we've shared really tough times together. And you know, Megan, I remember when you were meant to be coming over to Adelaide for the Adelaide Biennial in 2000 to participate in that when I curated Beyond the Pale, and you were pregnant with your beautiful Taniora, and you know, you felt like you were letting me down by not being able to come over. But you, the moments that we've shared, like you were there when my dad was diagnosed with leukemia, like literally you were there with me, and you came with me to take him to the medical. So those things, and when I mentioned Nancy Myflow before, when you share those kinds of experiences with people, art has saved me. Art and culture and First Nations peoples have saved me. because of the community that we have had, Ree was there when my brother, supported me at Palmari when my brother died, and these places they are our families, and so the depth of that is way more, I would say, than just simply walking into a space or creating doing a creative project. It's intrinsic to who you are. And I can immediately, as soon as I see or hear Megan or see Ree or see Wanda, I conjure up moments of shared experience on each other's countries as well. And I'm just so grateful to have that, because I just don't know I don't know how other people operate,
Yeah. And it's the tribes that you build.
And some of them have been a real pain in the ass, I have to say, and I'm not going to mention any names here.
That's on our private discussion.
But even those ones, you get through those tough times with each other, like you do with your brothers and sisters. You have arguments, and hopefully there's enough there to be able to work through them, and that's what builds you as a person, as a human being.
And I think it isn't just art, of course, it's culture. It's art and culture.
Yes.
I mean, my great-grandmother was hugely influential. My Uncle Sonny Wadu. I recently lost another uncle, my Uncle Ferdy, who was my absolute favourite in the world, and he was the most extraordinary human being. And he was the artist, because he just was. And him and I, even he got esophageal cancer, and one of the things he said to his family, his daughter, is like, tell Megan and then tell my brothers and sisters, but tell Megan first. And I'm his niece, and for him and I, to me, he said to me, Megan's my soulmate. That's a weird thing for an uncle to say, but him and I were like this, because I suppose we shared this kind of understanding of the world that perhaps other members of my family didn't quite get what we were on about, or art to me is about ideas. It's not just about aesthetic as part of it, but it's about ideas. It's about shifting some ground. It's about opening space. It's the most incredible thing, and at the end of it, it's about our own humanity. I know.
Yeah, and also, so I'm hearing about, I'm listening to relationships. So we're talking about relationships, and those relationships we find and that we build and that are already existing. And I'm thinking about your families, and so I'm hearing children and partners and extended families. How do you actually describe what you do to your families?
I don't. My mother still doesn't know what I do. Oh, she just hangs paintings on the wall. I mean, and
it's
that's
too much
okay.
sometimes.
It's okay. It's fine. Yes. My son is interesting though, because he's been in it and around it since birth. So he's great around art and artists and really gets it, because it's in his body. And it's in his body, because he's been there for so long. So he's quite a sophisticated young man, unfortunately for him sometimes, because of it, because of the people that are there. The other thing I was going to say very quickly is it's interesting, because we actually know one another, regardless of whether you actually know one another, you actually know one another. You walk into a room and Wanda Nanibush is in there. I know who she is and how she I can see her, straight away. And that's what's so extraordinary, because for me, and they're long-term relationships, they're not 5-minute jobbies.
Yeah, beautiful.
It influences how we do our work too, right? As we were talking about how, sorry, my internet's so bad, but how art might have saved us, or how we came into it. It's the same way we translate art to others, right? I always think about my family or folks that I love. It's like, where would you enter this story? How would you come into this show? How would you come into this artwork? You know, and that's my primary goal, I think, in the work that I do, and to translate those relationships to others, right? So that they can fall in love with it, they can engage it, it can change their life too. You know, it's not a career.
You're on mute, Megan.
Absolutely not just a career. You know,
Yeah.
it's for me, as I said, I felt like it was a calling, you know, like I found where I needed to be. I still love it 31 years later, you know, and I'm constantly learning. I still don't know anything, you know what I mean? It's like, I still don't know anything. I know some things, but I still don't know anything. And I feel, you know, so when Ree says that, you know, you're going towards retirement age, Ree, and that, but you're not, you know, you probably won't stop. I mean, why would you stop? You know, the thing is, it's like, you might as well, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
still learning, surely, you know, and pushing and changing things around and experimenting and looking and thinking. And
I think I'm approaching the age where I'll really get to do what I really want to do, what I've always wanted to do. And I think, you know, when you talk about our families, I think initially when I started my career, it was really for me personally, it was a bit of a life and death situation. I had to make some kind of decision. Otherwise, I had really no idea of where I was going to go. And so it was interesting because when I made that kind of decision and I decided, it was like, I guess, a moment, you know, when you have those moments in your life and you can kind of go, this was a turning point. Well, that decision for me to go to art school, or well, not even to go to art school. It wasn't even about art school. It was about embracing it in my heart and knowing that that was my soul calling and knowing that that was the journey that I was going to go on. But for me, it was about me personally at that moment. But now I've had some time in the world and I've had time to reflect, and I can see the importance of that work now and why that work, you know, how through the process of my early practice, I found myself, and then I realized that my role was to tell the story, to retain the information, like a lot of us, like what Brenda's doing in her work for her family. I'm mapping my family's story, because if I don't do that, there won't be any material that they can go back to that will bring that body of knowledge together. You know, when my mum is my last elder in my kind of family, and when she goes, it's me. And so if I don't actually do the work I need to do now with my mum as well, it'll be lost forever. So there's a mix now between trying to find that time to do the work that I really want to do in my practice, which I'll have plenty of time to do, but setting those goals kind of, you know, in place, and then making the time, you know, because my mum's going to be 80 shortly, and she's doing fine and she's still got great memory, but, you know, I know that that will change. And if I don't do the work I need to with her, then I will lose that, you know?
Yeah.
And as I always remember something that Uncle Charlie Perkins said, which was, you can't retire from being First Nations, Aboriginal, Indigenous. How do you retire from that? It's not.
it probably gets more intense.
Yeah, it does.
Absolutely, it does. There's no escaping it. You can't escape it. What are you going to do? And it becomes more pressing, I think, as Ree was saying, as time goes on, because you do realize, I don't downplay things I've been able to make happen with the input of lots and lots of people. You don't make any of it happen by yourself. It just doesn't happen like that. I don't downplay that, but I do feel a sense of urgency as time progresses, and I am not going to apologize for putting my hand up. I'm going to put my hand up for the next promotions around here at the ANU. I have talked myself down in so many areas throughout my life because I haven't felt that I was deserving enough. And it's not about being arrogant. It's just going, no, you know, we have to put ourselves out there for the people who are coming through. And as my father did, as people before him did, as the people we've been mentioning here today, as the younger ones who are coming through, I'm blown away by how articulate young people are out in the sector, who have such courage to get up and articulate in a way I could never have done at their age. And people of colour, First Nations people, people who are dealing with gender and sexuality. And we have a responsibility. It's a commitment. My work within the gallery sector, I always considered it was a cultural obligation and a responsibility that I have had to make the most of that position. And it's not just a given. You don't coast on it. You know, you have to put the time back in because of the sacrifices that people made for you to get there in the first place. And you know, and it feels good. It feels good to contribute and give back. It makes me feel good. Yeah. And I mean, why would I want to do anything else?
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That's right. Fantastic. I mean, I just feel like there is a sense of urgency within all of us because we've been held back for so long against our wishes. Our families, you know, like our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, you know, so there are things to look forward to for the future, especially around the work that you've committed yourselves to. But also in saying that, I'm understanding that everyone here is connected in some way to an institution or to the academy. Can we just quickly discuss how your practices kind of intersect with academia? Like, have you faced big issues here? Have there been, you know, a lot of headbutting, just basically for people to understand First Nations way of living and life, and you know what I mean? What do you think, Megan?
I've not really had a lot to do with academia. I mean, of course I intersect with it because I work with and to a whole lot of people. And I believe as a curator, you kind of serve a whole lot of people. You know, it's not the other model where you're the star, you know, like, sorry, you're the, you know, the thing is you're not there just for yourself. You serve a whole community, whether that's an arts community, but there's also, you have colleagues who are, you know, teach in art history, you know, you end up doing lectures and all of those kinds of things. In terms of the academy, I try and stay, you know, I'm not really that.
What's your
I'm not really that person. I don't see myself as an academic. I think, I'm not saying I'm not a thinking person or I don't have any criticality. I just, as I said, I am thinking about moving into that space. Yeah, I don't know. But I don't see myself as an art historian, even though I believe I'm building an art history. But it's, you know, one that sits inside and outside of the Western, you know, canon art history. It sits inside, but it also sits outside. It's also larger than it. So
academics steal your work all the time, Megan. That's why you got to do it yourself. You don't need them; they need you, baby.
You're almost, I would say, like an art historian. I can't say, like, it's art historiography because it's about writing our own histories. And I have to pay due respect to a really wonderful mentor of mine, Helen Ennis, who's not Indigenous, but one of my PhD supervisors, who worked to actively recruit me here for the Australian National University. And you know, they hadn't had a First Nations person working within the School of Art and Design in 20 years, and the last person was me teaching in the School of Art back then. And so you need your supporters, you need your colleagues, you need your people who are going to help you push your way in. And I don't give a shit now. I mean, like I turned 57. I turned 57 on Monday. I just went to an academic.
Happy birthday.
Thanks. I went to an academic promotion workshop for women only just today, and the statistics in there, and this is women of all backgrounds within the ANU, and the more men seek promotion because they just assume it as a given right, and women always hold themselves back. They will always hold themselves back, but the women had a higher success rate because they take it really seriously. And it was actually really affirming because, and there were, you know, it was people from quite lower levels of, you know, just coming through and how do I build my practice, not my practice, my academic progression. I think that's the freedom that comes with age. I just love it. You know, it's just like, I literally don't give a shit. Life is, every moment is precious. I lost half my family over a very short space of time. And so I'm grateful for every day that I have. And when I look at the shocking statistics that our communities have to deal with in terms of incarceration, you know, violence against women, the removal of our children, where the numbers just seem to keep going up through the roof. Every day is a day that you have to try and make something happen with however you do anything. And the students I teach, the course was completely restructured when I came in. It was Aboriginal art and culture, and it had all the, you know, the usual tropes of starting here and we'll go into the desert and then we'll head up into Arnhem Land and then we'll go over here and yada, yada, yada. And I just said, well, that's just going out the window. And the everyday, the political situation has to be melded right throughout the course. And I'm sure I teach it the wrong way compared to many of my other colleagues, and I get poo-pooed by certain old white male academics who've taught it a certain way for however long, but move over. I just don't care. You know, the feedback I'm getting from students is enough to make me keep going the way I'm going, and I say to them, it's a learning journey for all of us here. Like, I don't know everything. I'm learning as I go along. Bring things to me that you want to discuss as well in this. But I just say, you know, get out of the way. We're going to keep on coming through.
Is that how you feel, Ree?
Yeah, life's too short, time's too short. I haven't got the same amount of time on the other side now. I'm on the downhill run, so I need to kind of just get rid of all of the bullshit out of my way. And I think, I mean, I'm really great where I work. I've got great supportive people, and they are open to that new vision, the new critical way of thinking, a contemporary. I mean, not that our history isn't important, and it's important to still bring important seminal moments that are about that history, but we have moved on. The rest of the country might think we haven't, but we have moved on. And so that's how I teach. And like Brenda, I teach to the engagement and the needs of my students. And the more I reveal to them, the more they want to know. And that's how I teach, you know. And so it's been an amazing journey. It's something I've resisted every step of the way, because I have resisted that little voice inside of me that, like a lot of us, that tells me a lot of the time that I can't do it. And so my fight is me and my head, and then the work that I have to do. And so I'm really grateful I've stuck with it, and the voice has gotten smaller. It's not that it's not still there, it's just very small now. And so, and it's in the background, and it doesn't mean the same. There's the other part of the picture is a bigger picture, and I got to keep going. And so, you know, I'll do the best I can until I shift aside into research, hopefully, and then keep producing my experimental kind of digital creative works.
Can you just give us a really quick insight into the digital world there? Because that's something that I'm really, I think that we're all really.
Yeah, there's too many men in it. They need to get the hell out of the road.
Yeah.
because you know what, women have been around. I wouldn't be the artist I am today either, in terms of the Indigenous stuff I talked about before, and Brenda and Hetty and Bamali, but I also wouldn't have the vision and the courage to do what I do as an artist if it wasn't for those women that were the leading artists at the time in that period of the 90s, crossing over from the 80s into the 90s. The leading artists in this country were women. And so that's where my inspiration came from. They were my teachers. They opened up that, those possibilities for me, and they were around for quite a long time. In the meantime, the guys who were doing programming and the technical work in the background, of course, got PhDs and became professors in universities and open labs. So women then got knocked out of that space. But women are coming back. Women haven't disappeared. They're there. They're still making work. And there's now a new generation, And so for me, that's been one of the things that I've really wanted to be able to do, is to keep that door open for the next generation, and in particular young women, to be able to move into that creative space. That space isn't just about science. It's about creativity. It's about bringing the arts and science together, and it's developing. I mean, I'm working in new areas of technology at the moment, in augmented reality, like I've shifted my practice in many ways, and it doesn't just go there and stay there. It moves. That's the possibilities of technology. They open up so much for Indigenous artists, so many new ways of engaging, creating physical and non kind of physical spaces, and creating stories and new ways of kind of bringing communities together. So I'm really inspired. I mean, I thought I got to a point at once where I thought, I've done my work. Maybe I've done my best work. Let me look in the pile and see which one it is. But now I kind of go, I may never do my best work. That's really the reality.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, Brenda. No, you're right.
I was just going to say something about what I have loved about the Academy, and it goes on a bit from what Ree was saying, is that you meet colleagues who have skills you don't have, but you can work with them and harness those skills, or you can find ways for them to work with other people that you think would be, and like I'm loving meeting people who are working in the College of Engineering and Computer Science, Engineers Without Borders, who are working with First Nations communities, working on teaching drone skills to Indigenous communities about how to map country and landscape from their perspectives, not having it done for them. The School of Environment and Society. So you can have the ideas, but sometimes you've got nowhere to take them if you don't know who those people are. And it just stays an idea in your head. But the Academy, when you meet peers like that who are really amazing and, we think we can do that. These are incredible young people working across GIS, mapping, story mapping, all of these kinds of things I've got no idea about, but they intrigue me. And then I think, that could maybe be used in a certain way here. And then also bringing in communities outside who see these places, our mob, who see these places as completely exclusive and alienating. How do you just prise open the door? And we go out to them. They don't have to just come in here. We've got to go out to them as well. That for me is the Academy, and working on, and digital humanities. How do we store all our research? How do our archives get utilised by our communities? How can they be managed by our communities? When we find this material, who gets to access it? Who gets to own it? Who gets to determine how it's used? So it's not just building up my lovely little research points, but it's research for community so all of those things I think are really stimulating in terms of like the digital space as well, not just the digitally creative space, but how do you look at those ways of working with the people who are around you, because you can't do it all yourself either. You just can't.
Yeah.
I'll shut up now.
I'm looking, I was just about to stop it, Brenda. You're amazing. I'm looking at the time, so I'm just really mindful of that. And I want to just ask you something, Wanda. And we've had these discussions before about also what you used to do prior to being a curator, and just being out there, so to speak, on the ground in community. And I want to know from you all, but beginning with you, Wanda, please, is what does the word activist mean to you?
Interesting. I think activist. I was thinking a lot about, while everyone was talking about academia, I've had a huge privilege of being able to be inside, outside academia on my own terms, and actually met so many elders through academia and dive deep into traditional knowledges and Indigenous knowledge through there. So I think it can be a really interesting space. And activism has been in my blood. My mom says I walked out of her saying, "Fuck you." So that was kind of my first moment, I think. And then anytime her and my sister would fight, I would also tell my sister off. So I'd be protecting my mom. So activist as a term, I'm not a fan of.
Yeah.
So at one point I changed the words in my bio. I was reading Gerald Visner at the time, who's an Anishinaabe philosopher and creative writer and all around amazing human. And I've been working on this documentary on him for a few years. And we, I don't know, he's somebody, like Megan was saying, you know, when you, like how we met each other, it's like you meet somebody and it's like, oh, you're my person. He's like that for me. And he's freaking hardcore academic, but also hardcore, you know, he started in journalism. He's done super amazing activism on behalf of people without a voice within the legal system, Indigenous folks, you know, on death row or things like this. And then also a creative person. And I think that's like, we usually have all of those things. And so he writes about this concept of word warrior, and the idea that when we write, you know, there's certain ways in which we want to kind of unwind ourselves from the white words we've become. There's a certain way in which we want to speak to the philosophies and the ideas and the land in which we come from. There's a way in which we want to re-meld language to do what we want it to do. There's a way in which we work for our people. So then I started thinking about that, and I think I make work, you know, I make video and media work, and I make exhibitions, and I write. So I call myself an image and word warrior because it makes more sense to me to state why I'm doing it. So I'm not an artist because I don't really give a shit about the art for art's sake thing. And the art that I make, I don't want to have to think about the art world when I'm doing it at all. So it just saves me. It's a shorthand for me to not be lumped in a category that doesn't make sense to me. But I live and do tons of activism, you know, years and years and years and years of it, my whole freaking life. So I think it's much more about the fact that my heart lives in so many places in the world that there's no way I wouldn't stand up. And my heart right now is in Palestine. So it's very, very much my breath, my first breath that said, fuck you, you know?
Yeah. But do you think it's more like, because I have trouble with the word, because some people just throw the word out there and it's just like a final thing. Oh, you're an activist, you know? But could it be more described as instinct or instinctism?
Well, I think activist is still a useful term for those who are activists. Like there is a science to it even. There's like a, you know, there are activists, you know, who do this full time and who spend like a certain kind of energy around it. And there's a whole kind of milieu that has built up around it, you know, and there's like it's a thing, right? So I think it has a use value in that way. But yeah, it's often used to trivialize us and to demean our knowledge and to demean our actions. I'm called an activist whenever somebody at work, whenever somebody doesn't really like what I'm saying or doing, or when they want to say to somebody else, what she's about to do is going to make you uncomfortable. So they always add activists into my bio to make sure that, you know, people are kind of warned about before, you know, so for sure it's in those ways. But I also think it's a useful term in a lot of other ways. I mean, you know, Jolene Rickard, I agree with her in the thinking of sovereignty, right? Like sovereignty is an action.
Yes.
And I do that you can't sit there and talk about it. You can't, you know, you can't just think about it. You have to do it. It has to be done. And that is the form of activism, you know, that the activation of something and the action of something. It's like stupid people that have ruined the word, really. But I don't use the word Ogama, which I have to say out loud just because we're in a First Nations context, which is leader in our language. So that's something that would be given to you. So even the word warrior, if you use it in our language, it's something that would be given to you. I could never call myself that. That's why I use it in English, and I use a phrase, not just the word. Because technically I couldn't call myself that. Other people would call me that.
For me, sorry, Brenda, do you want to go? I can be quiet.
No, you go.
Activism, again, I think people get given that term because it's a way of categorizing, and you know, that's the whole thing. You know, I think I like the idea of activating rather than activism has a place, and sometimes, but as I said, if you're seen as an activist, then you're almost disempowered. So I don't like that. And the thing is that sometimes your actions are oblique, they're not overt. The things that you are doing and shifting and changing just through the work that you're actually doing shifts it. You know, you can be political just by being, if you know what I mean. I know that sounds a bit odd, but you know, as the woman in the room of a full, you know, like curatorial consort of people, and you're the only Indigenous female in the room, and you're the way in which you operate, you know, because you're carrying a whole lot of things and pushing a whole lot of things forward. So yeah, I find terminology difficult.
Oh, sorry. I was just thinking too, there's picking up on what Wanda was saying, and also Jolene, because there was that wonderful, she did a wonderful lecture recently through Power Institute, which was amazing, talking about sovereignty and the act of, it is an action. You have to enact it, embody it every day, because it becomes otherwise a speech act. Words are pointless if they aren't acted upon. So we can, I have such problem with terms like reconciliation. It's a brand, you know, these things become brands that people then attach themselves to, and it dilutes what the original intent was. Whereas to go and do something, to walk the walk and talk, not just talk the talk, but to walk the walk. And you're right, I could never call myself a leader. You know, this idea of also, I love how Gary Foley says, I'm not your fucking elder, and I'm not your fucking uncle. You know, that's exactly it. You're there for a reason. You're not investing yourself with something that has to be given by elders above you. And that's not why I work. I don't work for that. I do, because I'm always thinking of my father in particular, and my grandmother and my mother. What would make them, how do I honor their legacy? Because they're in me, and and with my boy who's 9, how do I make a world where it's a little bit easier for him, but that he never takes it for granted. I don't want him to take it for granted that it's easier, but I want it to be easier.
Beautiful. Thank you. Are there any parting words, because I think we need to call it, because this discussion has pushed out a little bit. I don't know where that time went. Would you like to comment anything before we end today? Because I don't know when we'd catch up again or see each other for, Megan, you're, sorry.
I would like to do, I just wanted to say thank you really to everybody here. It's been such a joy to even participate in this, and thank you for setting it up. And I would love to do it again. So
So would I.
could do this for hours. So
yeah, the way we're communicating is new, you know. Now it's a norm until we see a way to travel and transport ourselves in the future. So I just want to say, with all respect to you, Brenda, Ree, Megan and Wanda, thank you so much for participating today. And thank you to our audience, our viewers that have joined us today. Yeah, we're meeting for you, and especially also our First Nations people that are joining us today, and the students. You know, like we're so we're passionate about you, and also our emerging artists and First Nations people wanting to provide voice to our cultures. Yeah. So
I want to say one thing. I just want to say, well, thank you to all of you and sending love. But I also want to say that whatever it is we have gone through as First Nations people in this world, in terms of colonization and all of those practices of oppression, genocide, apartheid, all of it, that we cannot today let that happen to anyone else.
absolutely not.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
you all.
Thank
you very much, Shannon.
Thank you.
These things sustain, I think. The opportunities like this to get together and talk with people who understand are what sustain me. So I'm very grateful for having been asked to participate, and I love you all.
Love you all too. Makes me very happy. This made me very happy.
Bye for now.
Take care, everybody.
Bye. See you. Thank you.
Thank you.